and welcome to the second DSSC Insights series. We are very happy to have you here today for our first session this year. My name is Franziska and I work for the Fraunhofer ISST, and as we are coordinating the Data Spaces Support Center, I am also today your moderator. And as we have an exciting lineup of speakers today, I will not take too long, but please let me give you an overview on what you will expect today. So first, Boris will give you an overview on what are data spaces. Yogi and Bert, who will join the meeting still, will then present our glossary that shall serve as a base for a common data space language. And we also have two guests for today from the support actions, and I very warmly welcome Nevena, who you see here from the Green Deal, and also Oscar for both coordinators, Nevena coordinating the Green Deal and Oscar coordinating the manufacturing. So we are very curious to listen to your presentations also. And yes, as we have already touched upon in our last Insight series, Timo will give you an introduction into how the DSSC is related to the European Data Innovation Board. And as we have also planned for some time for your questions, please feel always free to post them into the chat, so we will make sure to answer them. And yes, before I hand over to Boris, one little housekeeping also, as we are recording the session and upload it later on our YouTube channel. So just for your information that you can always share it with your colleagues afterwards. So with that, I would like to hand over to you, Boris. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Franziska. Also, happy welcome from my side. As Franziska said, it's the second event in the row of our Insight series. And also I'd like to stress the point that I'm more than happy and excited, to be honest, that we have so cool speakers here in the lineup. That's really excellent. And yeah, and as I said, I'm really also happy to be part of this series. Franziska said it. My task is a little bit to tell you what data spaces are, and I prepared a very brief presentation in order to do so. And what I will do now is try to share my screen to share this presentation with you. Let me juggle. Where is it? Here we are. And I put it into full screen, and I guess Franziska, if you could nod your head if you see it, so we are good to go, so to say. Very good. So yeah, introduction to data spaces. And data spaces is a topic that, as we know, has been around for quite some time and got a little push, of course, through the publication of the European Data Strategy, because the European Data Strategy, mainly among other things, focuses on the idea of finding the right balance between increasing and stimulating the use and reuse of the data that we have in many amounts and volumes in Europe. So we sit on a data treasure. And on the other hand, also consider, let's say, the legitimate interests of the data provider to be self-determined when it comes to what happens with that data once the data is shared. And why is that important? Well, I just talked this morning to a colleague from Carriot, so the software company of Volkswagen, and they said, you know, Boris, sometimes I got the impression that everybody feels making available the data, in particular of sufficient quality, is somewhat for free and does not come at a cost, which is of course not true. Providing data, in particular, if it should be of good quality, comes at a cost. That's something that we know at latest since Henry Ford told us about the fundamental principles of quality management. And this holds true also for data. So we need to find a balance between reusing the data for, well, industrial or closed communities, but in particular for open communities or for even the society. For example, if we look into how to fight pandemics in the future and to develop new treatments and medicine in the healthcare sector, for example. And one of the key instruments to, well, allow for data sharing in a fair fashion, so protecting data sovereignty and trust among participants, is data spaces. That's why it's so important. So what are data spaces? And that brings me to my first slide. In the end, I said it's an instrument to implement this data strategy, right? So it is not an end in itself, but it is a means to a certain end. And next to, let's say, the idea to use data for a greater common good, we can identify a number of other, let's say, business rationales to set up a data space. For those of you who participated in the last Insight series, you should have already recognized this picture, because I had it also with me the last time, but be assured this is the only one in the last slide which I reuse, so the next stuff will be new. But I think for those who hadn't had a chance to be with us last time, I think it's a good intro, because as I said, it is a means to an end and not an end to itself. And what we did by analyzing briefly, of course, in the preliminary version, the 6 lighthouse projects of Gaia and also Gaia itself, we might come up with a certain list of patterns and business case patterns, but that basically form the rationale for a participant to join a data space. Because, yeah, I mean, there should be a reason to do so, because many of us do not sit around and wait for a data space initiative to come along, asking them to join the data space. There should be a motivation to do so. And well, and a pretty easy one is, well, sharing a common burden, for example, cost. And Catena X is the data space in the automotive industry. And for those of you who are a little bit familiar with this kind of industry, know that 25% only of the entire value chain and also of the bill of materials, so basically the list of parts of which a car consists, so only 25% of that is controlled by the car brands, the automakers that we all know, like Volkswagen or Peugeot or Fiat or so. Well, and the rest is in the, so 75% is in the value chain, in the production network. So if we then, on the other hand, consider the fact or realize that we have to have, let's say, full transparency about which individual component is built into the car that we have or use or lease or something, then it's crystal clear that, let's say, neither Volkswagen nor Mercedes nor Peugeot or Fiat can do that on their own. They need to team up with the entire production network and form a data space to share these pieces of information. Other business rationales are more, let's say, forward-looking, innovation-driven. So not so much about, let's say, the production or supply network, but rather offering a new service that companies weren't able to offer before. And one example is in the mobility domain, because to really offer end-to-end mobility services that orchestrate your travel journey from the very start, the use of a local public transport system like a tram or a bus, and then a railway service provider to a hotel chain, Uber, Free Now, whatever, you usually end up as a private person or a business traveler with interacting with like 7, 8, 9 different mobility service providers. And the cool thing would be if there would be something orchestrated, right? But to orchestrate this trip, the individual actors, companies providers that you engage with need to team up in order to share, let's say, my trip data, also perhaps my preferences, my loyalty program numbers, my credit cards. They need to share their timetable data, and they also need to have access to context information like weather, traffic jams, or delays and stuff like that. So this data needs to be shared. Sector. And there are a couple of other patterns I don't want to go in too much detail of, but I think this is useful because in the end, it's also a business decision for every participant to join a data space. Do I gain more by joining the data space than it would cost? And do I gain more than through alternative ways to exchange data, right? And we, of course, are pretty sure that this is the case, as we can see in these examples. Right. So speaking of examples, this is a picture that I took from the mobility data space, which conveys a little bit the fundamental message how a data space is designed and built. It brings together different participants, and these participants can be representatives of different sides of a market. For example, like on the lower right-hand side, so floating car data, for example. Yeah, those are, let's say, the car makers, then basically providers of data, and all of us who drive a car and produce data, so we are producers of data, which then will end up with a data provider. On the other hand, for example, on the left-hand side, cities here are also participant because they want to manage traffic in a smarter and more ecological way as we do it now. So, and in order to do so, they need to have access to, let's say, these floating car data, but they also need to, let's say, be aware of, let's say, contextual information, as I said, like traffic jams or weather conditions, or, for example, the utilization of parking facilities, things like that, and also the utilization and, let's say, capacity of e-charging points in their city. So this needs to be managed, and in order to optimize the management, we need to bring together data from different providers. Of course, another side of the market is app providers. As I said, for example, orchestrators who will orchestrate my journey, so to say. And they all need to be better off by joining this data space, right? And what we also see is that the mobility data space itself looks a little bit like a platform. And to a certain extent, of course, it is a platform. However, it is a platform which goes without a central data pool, so that the data is not dumped into one large database where then the data provider loses control about what's happening in this pool. And the data space does not, let's say, institutionalize itself as ending up with, let's say, one player in the market dominating and defining the rules of the game. So data governance for the data space. So both the technical architecture as, let's say, also the governance logic is distributed or at least collaborative. Let's call it like that. However, in order to do so, if you do not end up with one large bucket where you put all the data in, you need to put into place a couple of services, software services, that make sure that, let's say, within this distributed network, the different sides of the market find each other and are able to share data and trust each other. And that is why we need a couple of fundamental services in the middle, like a catalog. So, oh, cool, I have a couple of data that I want to share. So I need to describe it and make it available through a catalog, similar to, let's say, if you go shopping on the Amazon website or something. So we need to describe the data without putting all the actual data there, just the descriptions, metadata. The next thing is, as I said, trust is necessary. So you want to trust that the guy who really requests your data is actually the one he pretends to be, right? So we do that through identity management. So you can really trust this is the identity that basically is also visible for myself. We also would need to have vocabularies in place, and similar to the glossary that Franziska mentioned at the beginning, we need to, create a common understanding of what the data means, which is also is basically an evergreen of, let's say, information systems, of course, and it will be around for the next decades as well, for sure. But we make good progress because we can use RDF-based vocabularies in order to do so. Yes, and so you see there is a number of, let's say, services that need to be put into place in data spaces, often through intermediaries, which basically offer, let's say, this services for the better of the ecosystem, so for all participants. So in the end, basically a data space is and I hope that's on the next slide, right? From a technological point of view, it's a data integration concept. And for those of you who are interested in that, it stems from research strengths around semantic technologies and the semantic web, most notably, where the idea was born that not all data integration efforts should end up in really consolidating data, but rather referencing data, in fact, linking the data. And the data space concept is, so to say, well, a next evolutionary stage of what we know as the linked data concept. That is where it comes from. So the first papers were written 15 years ago. So you can look them up. So the data space concept and these kind of things. And in those papers, if you, let's say, analyze them, you would realize that, well, the core constituents are these four bullet block, the upper four bullet points on the left-hand side, like no physical data integration, no common schema, but integrating it on a semantic level. So it's basically also redundancy is foreseen because, for the same real world object, data representations can sit in company A in database A, as well as in company B in database B, right? So it's redundancy, so envisaged intended redundancy, and data space can overlap, and we will come to that later as well. Then we, from the International Data Spaces Initiative, which we founded 8 years ago already, we said, okay, that's nice, that fits our needs, no central pool, but we need to add 2 other ingredients like trust between participants and data sovereignty. And data sovereignty is implemented through policies which constrain the usage of your data by third parties. So that was the starting point. But now what we see is, I have a data space and I founded a data space company as an intermediary, and that's happening. Mobility data space, the organization behind there is the Datenraum Mobilität GmbH, which translates to Mobility Data Space Limited Liability Company, right? So obviously there is a business. So from a business point of view, it's a form of collaboration around data. Yeah, and I mentioned that already. Of course, since these companies that form represent intermediaries for data sharing service, we are directly, you might guess it, at the Data Governance Act, because the Data Governance Act explicitly sets out provisions for, let's say, these kind of data sharing service providers. For example, they say, you should, if you do that as a company, you should separate these activities from your regular business. Let's not discuss that today, but this is one of the provisions of the Data Governance Act. So there are 3 viewpoints on data spaces: tech, business, legal. We already did some work in the DSSC because we put, let's say, well, the core, the fundamental knowledge nuggets, so to say, into the starter kit for data space designers. As you can see here on the left-hand side and on the lower right-hand side, there is also the link, the download link. And mainly the content is basically listed here in this blue box. And I would like to point to 2 things. First, the glossary. Yogi will present the glossary later on, I believe. As Franziska said, it's the common language about our joint object of investigation. And also I want to touch upon this BLOFT viewpoints. BLOFT stands for architecture viewpoints, which comprise a business view, a legal and governance view, an operational view, functional view, and a technical view. So if you want to build a data space, you should make sure that you address this viewpoints. It's architectural thinking. So for those of you who have been around with information systems design, it should be pretty straightforward. What I also did, but I don't want to go into all the details here because I'm already running out a little bit of time, is we came up with the first structure, a first analysis of 2 example data spaces according to this architectural viewpoints. And you can see here certain, let's say, business use cases for Catena X and mobility data space. Also the legal viewpoint. So of course, which also would probably happen in all data space initiatives, in particular in industrial or B2B domains, when you, I can share this anecdote, usually in the second or third workshop, when you sit together and say, okay, this is a cool use case and we will all be better off if we share the data. And as I said, in the second or third workshop, there is usually one guy from legal and sitting also in the room. And then this guy raises their hands and say, sounds great, cool idea, but it's not allowed due to antitrust law. And you need to a little bit, go one step back and make sure that you comply with antitrust law, of course, because that in order to make sure that you do not misuse a market dominant situation that might evolve out of the uncontrolled sharing of the data. Of course, we have operational points to consider, like usually you have a project which you start with, and many initiatives end up in a non-for-profit association, which is also reasonable because we do it not for just one individual business model, but for, let's say, well, community, and therefore we usually would end up with community-like also, well, business models, which then end up, for example, in the cooperative society also sometimes. Yeah, and you can go down the list through functionalities, which pretty much relate to what I said when I introduced the mobility example, and so on and so forth. Yes, and what we are currently working on is a data space taxonomy, and this is the first level screenshot of this mind map, and I would like to walk you a little bit through that. It's preliminary. Zille and Anna will just throw stones to me because I show it here, because it's just preliminary work, but I wanted to show you in order also to get you, ask you to get your feedback. So if we want to describe a data space, and that is what we want to do in the DSSC, we want to come up with an inventory of all the data space initiatives in Europe to learn from them. So data spaces that are similar like yours do this and that configuration, or they formed this kind of legal entity, or they deployed these kind of services. But we need to have a common understanding what are, let's say, the attributes to describe a data space. So you can see three groups here. General information basically goes along the line, okay, every data space, good idea, right? We would like to ask for the life cycle stage. So is it like, and I go to the left here, is it like in project preparation stage, is it in implementation, is it adopted, or in the scale-up mode? Then, of course, we ask for the sector. So is it a vertical? And then we would ask for which vertical, or rather horizontal, and so on and so forth. And then we have, let's say, these viewpoints. And you can see here the business viewpoint, which then also elapses into, let's say, this business case pattern, which I just showed. Then we would also ask for the use cases. So what's basically the business model for the data sharing intermediary? Is it non-for-profit, profit, or low profit? The data ecosystem members, so are private companies, public companies, and so on and so forth. We would also ask for the legal and governance viewpoint, like what kind of regulation do you have to comply with, as I said. We would also ask for operational viewpoint in terms of, let's say, what are funding patterns? What's the major source of funding? Is there EU funding involved? Functional viewpoint is pretty clear. So, which kind of these basic services do you use? And which kind of value-added services do you also offer on top of that, like data quality, integration service, and so on? And we ask, of course, which kind of technology do you deploy in order to do that? So data space architecture, standards, and stuff like that. And then, and this is what I also would like to bring to your attention. I think we should talk more, not only about the fundamental technology, but also about this green stuff here, but in particular also about this blue stuff. So what data actually is shared? Is it master data? Is it, let's say, event data from IoT devices? Is it open data, to which, of course, other constraints apply? Is it transactional data, like an invoice, I don't know, or some sort of, I don't know, procurement or production order or so? Is it multimedia streams and so on and so forth? So we need a taxonomy of the data itself. Then we should also look into, and that's interesting, is this data space working with data donations? Yes or no? Is it a leasing concept? So I grant you the usage right until a certain point in time for a certain fee. Is it a swap? So I give you my data because I get data of equal value in return, and I'm good with that. Or is it a data service through an API, for example, right? The next thing is, which is also interesting, at least to me, what kind of data sharing scenarios are supported? Is it one-on-one? Is it one-to-n? You know, where let's say there is one service provider that takes the data of n sources, but makes sure that the different data policies are obeyed. Is it end-to-end, or is it like in Catena X, a chain across multiple stages of a network? And then last thing, what kind of data exchange scenarios do we have? Is it, let's say, exchanging the data or exchanging the algorithm, like computer data, right? And this is what we wanted to know from all of the data spaces around, not in order to just have a look at it, but rather to analyze it and to find best practices and to establish links between similar data spaces for your benefit. And with that, I come to an end. I should stop here. Yeah, I hope that you have now, that you share our view on what data spaces are, what kind of, let's say, viewpoints we can establish on data spaces, and which kind of, let's say, well, options we have in implementing data spaces. And I should not consume up too much time. Therefore, I stop here. Hope you find it interesting. And then I hand over back to Franziska. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Boris, for this insightful presentation. And I also think that the participants think so, because we have 330 participants and nobody is leaving this webinar, so that is good. Maybe as we also received a few questions, maybe I will just pick one of the questions, and then we have, of course, planned time after the presentation. So there's one from Alex Tursky, who's asking regarding the transportation example, will the end user continue to use 7 apps when we have the data spaces? So
yeah, well, I hope no. And of course, I know it's very complicated because individual service providers are concerned with not losing the interface and the interaction to the end customer, that's for sure. But honestly, for me, it would be added value to have an orchestrated mobility service, at least a notification. For example, from Lufthansa, we realized that your train is delayed, we booked you to a later flight, things like that. And that is something that I would really appreciate, because I can tell you, I use these apps a lot because in Central Europe, lots of things well, happen then in the end differently as compared to as if they were planned. Yes, and I hope that some of these orchestrator services will be available pretty soon, because I would use them. And because the question is also on transportation. Yes, and in the logistics domain, so B2B mobility, if you may, this is happening. Yeah, because in the end, the customer is better served because he don't want to end up with, let's say, doing the integration on their own.
Thank you very much. Okay, with this, I would then hand over to Bert to present the glossary for us.
Thank you, Francesca. Unfortunately, I don't manage to share. Sorry, there's something with my Zoom, which I can't give access now. If you would be able to share. Okay,
I can try.
Okay, while doing that, so this part is on behalf of Yogi, Antti Poikola, and myself. So we are doing this work coordinating this work together. And as you can see from the next slide, why are we working on this glossary? It is, of course, because we don't want to create a Tower of Babel. We need some common language across these data space initiatives in order to accelerate our knowledge exchange, to make sure that we know what we talk about together, and also to let all the various participants contribute and co-create, and also allow us to streamline the way we talk about these data spaces and all their various aspects. So how do we do that? By co-creating a glossary amongst the consortium itself and all of its stakeholders. And we will try to use the terms defined here then consistently in the materials that the Data Space Support Center create, such that we converge on that common language, and we try to lead it by example and by practice. This is not to say that there will still be some variations of certain terms. We're pretty sure we cannot unify everything, but at least wherever we can, we will try to harmonize our language in all the work we do. So if you can move to the next slide, that says a bit of our timeline. This is not new. We've started to work on that even before we officially kicked off. Because it was identified as a very early need of this consortium. We have a more or less mature draft at the moment, and we also included some of the generic terms already in this first starter kit, which was published end of December, and that Boris referred to before in this presentation. So in the starter kit, you can find a first set of terms already defined. In the meantime, we've moved on, and we're kind of moving towards a launch, which is targeted now for middle of March, in which we will add on top of the generic terms, some first guidance about the key roles, how we name the roles. We call it a role model, as we think that is the next important set of terms to harmonize on. This will never end. We anticipate that we will need to continue to work on that in the years to come to further improve existing definitions based on further insights, or also to add additional sections to this glossary. But we are a bit of a pivotal moment here, where we try to come to a first baseline of version 1 set of terms. In the next slide, we set out some rules of the game. So we cannot define the entire dictionary here. We only want to focus on terms really frequently used in defining and building data spaces, their common building blocks, and the terms we need to define the blueprint, which is a major deliverable of the Data Space Support Center. We will reference existing definitions wherever possible. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. If there's a good reference and a good definition out there, we will adopt it. But we do need to converge when definitions are conflicting or not really matching. We already noticed that it may be very hard to really unify the terms in the legal, the technical, or sometimes domain-specific areas. So sometimes we may need to accept some variations in order to satisfy the various types of users of terms. We will also try not to force anyone to change their terminology, but we will invite existing frameworks and initiatives to adopt a common language wherever that is possible. So we're not force-fitting things, but we will try to make sure that people understand how the various frameworks and initiatives are using certain terminology. Currently, in the document we're working on, we have a section with generic terms and a section with role models, and we anticipate this may grow with additional sections over time. So that's a bit of the concept. Let me zoom in a bit on the role model, because that's the most recent development and still ongoing. And we're actually opening up this part of the section really for feedback and for additional inputs. So why do we work on a role model? Because any governance model needs to be clear on the roles and responsibilities, needs to be clear on the roles of the various stakeholders of a data space. That is essential in order to converge and to make these data spaces interoperable within themselves amongst the partners participating, but also interoperable across different data spaces. And it's also very essential as a starting point for any architecture. And again, here we will use these unified role model language in the deliverables of the Data Space Support Center. So that's why we do this. In the next slide, you see a bit of a sketch of, what are the components? So why is this so important? One of the deliverables for us is to describe the design approach for specifying the business and the governance aspects of a data space. Boris already referred to that, and he gave some examples of how data spaces are articulating their business models and their governance structure. It starts with identifying the needs of a data space. The role model is essential in defining the key roles, next to defining and becoming specific on the data products, and also on the rights and obligations, the legal aspects of a data space. All of that together are essential ingredients in order to formulate a proper data space governance. So that's the crucial place that this role model has for any implementation of a data space. Okay, and then this slide then shows a little bit where we are at. We are mapping what existing initiatives and frameworks have already used as terms. And in the table, you see some of these listed in the rows. And in the columns, we try to combine and lock how and to look for a common denominator of how the various initiatives have done that. You will also see that there's a large variation amongst the terms used. So this is not an easy exercise. But we try to converge this to a common set of the roles that always need to be there. Some have already received an icon here in the table. Those are, we think, the most essential ones that every data space will need to have clarity on who are the data right holders, who is the data provider role, who is the receiving role. We also believe that the end user will need to be there and defined in most instantiations. And then there is an intermediary and or a governance body that will need to be named and assigned a role. So these for sure are always there and will need to be properly defined. And this type of table will help users to map this common language to whatever language they have already adopted or they're used to. Okay, so this is more where we are at. And this is also the framework where which we are putting out for getting more feedback and which we will drive to a conclusion by our mid-March delivery. I think that's my last slide, the next one. So that's where we are. We're looking for feedback to allow people to co-create. When we distribute the slide, I need to add a second link here. The first link is the current general terminology section, still open for feedback, but the link to be added is exactly that role model. And we will have a couple of open work sessions. Invitations will go out soon, but these are the time slots we have reserved for working in the feedback that is still out there with a target to release this by mid-March. So that's where we are with both the general terminology and the role model definitions. Very open to questions, maybe later.
Yes, thank you very much, Bert. Let me check the questions, but I think looking also on the time, I would prefer to take them later. And now, if you're prepared, Nevena, please, I would like you on stage. Is it possible for you to share your presentation?
Yes, just give me 1 second. And let me put it in presentation mode. Now it's all good, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So thank you so much, Franziska, and thank you so much to the DSSC team for inviting our project to be here today in this webinar and present, what we mean under the Green Deal Data Space. And as you can see here, we call ourselves the Green Deal Data Space Foundation and its community of practice. So just zooming in a bit more on the Green Deal data space, we could hear from Boris Otto the good definitions and the basis of data spaces. Of course, I'm not telling anything new when I mentioned the data strategy. That was the strategy that introduced the concept around data spaces. But in our case, it's very important as well to look at the Green Deal. So Of course, I'm sure that many of you heard about the Green Deal, but just a reminder that that's a big plan of the Commission that was presented at the beginning of von der Leyen's Commission on how to be the first climate neutral continent in the world by 2050. And of course, the EU also plans to cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030, comparing to the levels in 1990. And of course, all of this was put in a legislation by the climate law. So using these two elements, we arrived to the Green Deal data space. And here I'm just sharing a definition that we came up with. It's still something very basic, but of course, under the Green Deal data space, in our case, we see a federation of data ecosystem that enables policymakers, academia, also private sector actors, so also SMEs and citizens around the world to jointly tackle the challenges caused by the climate change. So just showing you our consortium. So we started the project, the CSA, so it's a coordination and support action. It's a project funded by the Digital Europe program of the Commission. The duration of the project is 18 months. So we started the work last year, back in September, and 1 year from now we should be ready with all the deliverables that are linked to our project. And as you can see also from the slide, our consortium is composed of 11 partners, and we have 3 associated partners. Our strength in this consortium is that our partners are bringing us to different kind of sectors. So here we can see, maritime, atmosphere, geophysics. We have remote sensing companies as well, and we also have, the academia presented. So this is something that is bringing our effort and also helping us to reach to many stakeholders, and also to over 100 initiatives that are currently in place related to the Green Deal. So what are the overall objectives? I think from the previous presentations, we could hear a lot of useful informations, and what are the key pillars of the Green Deal data space. So as a first step, we aim to establish a so-called community of practice. So here we are really looking for a joint effort to have stakeholders that are active in this field to join us and work together on our overarching goal to create a roadmap. So as a first step, currently we are in this phase to create and establish our Green Deal community of practice. And of course, as a second step, you could also hear from the previous presentations, it's very important also in our case to identify those high priority data sets and to have, a selection of those data sets that are already available, which are accessible, which are not accessible, different kind of aspects. And there, for instance, in our case, there was a major development in these past days. The Commission published an update regarding the Open Data Directive, where they publish, the 6 categories, including 3 categories that are very relevant for the Green Deal that needs to be made public and accessible in the upcoming 16 months. So currently we are also looking at that. That is out really I think it was last week when we got the news from that. And of course, the blueprint. So as you heard, the glossary, of course, we are also building our own Green Deal related blueprint. The goal here, of course, is to enable cross-sectoral technical interoperability and the technical blueprint of the reference architecture that would explain how existing or planned data ecosystem, looking at the national, at the regional and local level, can be connected to provide an interoperable, secure data sharing environment. And all of this leads us, of course, also to the governance and business models. So we are also exploring applicable governance and business models that are already out there and trying to analyze them from our own perspective. And as I already mentioned, the key outcome in our case of the project will be a roadmap, an implementation roadmap on how to implement the Green Deal data space. And we will share the key milestones, the key steps that are needed, and all the the community of practice, the high priority data sets, the blueprint, and the governance business model. They will all fit to our final kind of deliverable that will be the roadmap itself. So those that are really interested, when you can see some real results from our side and when all this material will be accessible, here I'm just sharing a timeline of the project. So until now, we were mainly in a preparatory phase. We were really working on our strategies, how we want to target our stakeholders, how we want to engage. And now we entered in the so-called phase 1 of the project, where we are building our community of practice. And according to our plan, we foresee the first round of deliverables at the end of August and also at the end of September. That's where you will see the outcomes that will use the work done in the phase 1 of the project. And then focusing mainly on the Green Deal actions, because I think Green Deal means a lot of things for a lot of people, and of course Green Deal is present everywhere in our daily life. However, in the challenge in our project was to try to find the right focus of those Green Deal actions that have been presented. So we decided to focus on the biodiversity strategy, the zero pollution action plan, and the climate change adaptation strategy. Basically, the choice of these 3 is due to the fact that they are interlinked with all other strategic actions. And they also represent more or less the full scope of the Green Deal. Our aim is obviously to reach out to the other strategic actions coming from the Green Deal through the other data spaces that are active in this field. So that is why I know this slide has many information, but this gives an overview of the Green Deal. So something that I was just saying before. So Green Deal is not only about planting trees and making our planet great, but there are very strategic actions that are really linked to specific actors. So we can speak here, of course, about mobility. We can talk about manufacturing. Of course, there is the aspect on the energy. So, and there are different data spaces currently working on these specific sectorial aspects. And so I think this slide really shows how complex is the Green Deal, where we put ourselves and where we see, a work together with the other data spaces. For instance, there is also the data space effort on the digital product passport. That's something that we need to follow closely. The Green Deal has a specific strategy for the circular economy that is linked to the digital product passport. So how do we foresee the work together with the Data Space Support Center and of course the other sectoral data spaces? Of course, the work already started a few months ago as it was presented. So we already received many inputs from the support center, and we have been also in contact with the other sectoral data spaces. But I think it's just a good, kind of reminder of points or on where all these data spaces needs to be aligned, because of course we are all looking at specific aspects, but as it was mentioned, for instance, from the legal standpoint, all the data spaces are impacted by the same legislations coming from the EU. So of course here we speak about the Data Act or the Data Governance Act. In our case, we have to look even beyond and look at all other legislations that are coming from the Green Deal. So here we can also speak, about all the reporting that are requested on sustainability. Companies will have to report about their activities, or there is the EU taxonomy, etc. And of course, all the common standards to have, a direction on the data governance models and just a generic framework for discussions with the rest of the data space community. And besides the data space community and the other initiatives, we in our case we are also focusing on initiatives that were launched by the European Union. So we are really not trying to reinvent the wheel, because there has been an impressive environmental observation that was developed by Europe in this last years and decades. So of course, we are really relying on the work done by the Destination Earth initiative. It's the digital twin of our planet Earth. Of course, there is EMODNet. They are dealing with the marine data, so that's something that we are closely following from the policy perspective. We have the European Environment Agency. They are looking, all the initiatives from national and regional level as well. The JRC is doing a lot of work, especially, of course, on the INSPIRE directive and the upcoming Green Data for All initiative. I think also Copernicus is a quite well-known, Earth observation program of the EU, and there we also follow the work of the cloud platforms that are linked to the Copernicus. And in our case, we find it also relevant to mention, the big cloud providers that are active in the sustainability field, because they had some big and bold announcements in this last year about sustainability. And we do believe that there are some initiatives that they have launched that can be interesting from the Green Deal data space standpoint. So of course, for instance, on the governance and business models. So we have been already in contact with Amazon sustainability. We know, for instance, that Microsoft is also running a planetary computer. So there are already a lot of things in action also from the private sector. And getting closer to the end of my presentation, I just wanted to share an example. I really like to use this example. It's a recently launched research initiatives, IRENE. And this example really shows, how complex is the Green Deal, and how is it interlinked also with the other data spaces. So for instance, as you can see on the slide, this research is monitoring, how a human body is exposed to the chemical effects, and how is it impacting our health. And of course, this is also looking at different areas. So here again, we can speak about chemistry, biology, toxicology, and all the different environmental and human impact. So I think this example really showcases, that the Green Deal data space is really not only focusing on a specific aspect, but it has its kind of cross natural feature, so to say. So if someone is really interested to join us and learn more, how we want to engage, we are launching a call for use cases and to join our community. So here we just listed, some answers to the basic questions. Who do we expect to contribute? So of course, we speak about data consumers, data providers, or intermediaries. And in our case, obviously, it's very important that those applying have some sort of support in related to those 3 strategic actions. So the biodiversity, zero pollution, or the climate change. And we foresee different level of engagement. So someone can become a use case, or if someone just wants to follow the work or contribute to some aspect, we are really happy to engage. So I think obviously there are many benefits of joining a work, such as the deployment of the Green Deal data space. Again, referring back to the presentation from Boris Otto, he also listed what are the benefits of data space itself. But here obviously we see we are just listing some of the benefits of the Green Deal data space. So we left, I'm leaving here the email address from the project, where if there are any questions, we look forward to answer those. This is the form that you can fill out. It takes less than, I think, 20 seconds to do so. So you can find all the details on the greatproject.eu website. There is a get involved part where we just ask basic information. And the last item from my presentation is a little promotion also from our side. So we are organizing our very first webinar on the Green Deal data space. We aim to go into a bit more detail and focus really on the Green Deal, you know, just to have an open discussion why the Green Deal data space is so relevant, why is it needed, who we need to include, what are the challenges that our community is facing right now, you know, or any other items. So we foresee that 1st of March, and if you want to get more information, of course, follow us on different kind of social platforms, so on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. And I think that's that's the last slide from my presentation. So thank you so much for your attention. And again, in case of questions, do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nirina, for this very great presentation. And also as the Data Space Support Center, we can say that we really like our collaboration. So that is truly great. Thank you very much. I see also questions in the chat. Maybe you can scroll through them already and we will take them after the next presentations. So this is when I would like to call you, Oscar, on stage to present. Do you have the, yes, it works. So you're starting to share your screen and we can see it. So over to you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Francisca, and thank you for the Data Space Support Center to provide us the opportunity today to present a little bit what this preparatory action for the data spaces in manufacturing are, so people can get to know a little bit more about our domain and how we are planning actually to prepare ourselves for the future deployment of this type of data spaces. And the presentation today is basically just trying to bring you into a first insight of what is this action, Data Space 4.0, then try to motivate you a little bit about why we think that is worth joining the initiative, getting engaged, and which type of activities are actually planned and already rolling as part of our project. So Data Space 4.0 in a nutshell, why we are actually looking into this common European data space for manufacturing. Probably I would like to start just this presentation trying to bring people back. Probably if I ask what is important about 1993, people may not have this number in the mind, but actually it was the year that the European single market was actually started here in the European Union, and this has had a huge impact for manufacturing industry in terms of how manufacturing represent a very important portion of the actual and how manufacturing contributes to the European economy. In a similar way, when we look at digital transformation and how we are now starting to build a common European market for our industrial data, this type of action is actually trying to bring together all the necessary actors that can actually shape this type of single and unique and common European market for the industrial data in the right direction. In terms of where we are basically falling, here we are collaborating with the Data Space Support Center, and we are one of the many of those vertical data spaces that will have to work on the common infrastructure and the common services that will allow this type of data integration and data sharing that Boris was commenting a few minutes ago. This is a relatively short project, so we started already in October 2022. We are starting to share the first results on our project website, but more importantly, the actual community that is behind this CSA is already in place. So it is not something that will happen at the end of 2023, at the beginning of 2023, and I will introduce a little bit later the community of stakeholders, associations, and initiatives that are backing up this project. What is this CSA about? The CSA is basically about building this community. It's about connecting things that have been very relevant, that have served to create the pathway for data spaces in Europe. Manufacturing from the very beginning, and particularly supply chain in manufacturing, took this idea of creating common data spaces, and a number of initiatives at the national level, at the international level, they have been popping up, and they have been basically embryonic initiatives that have taken place across Europe. The main objective and the main goal, our actual mission as a CSA is to make sure that all these things that are happening at national level, at European level, actually work together. It's not about bringing a unique voice into the data space for manufacturing arena. Actually, that is probably impossible. But what is important is that the voice is actually unified, that the initiatives, the national initiatives on Industry 4.0 that are pushing the development of data spaces from the national level work in harmony and in good synchronization and harmonization with the European initiatives that are taking place, trying to shape the common principles and structures for data spaces across Europe. So the main goal and the main initiative is actually connecting the dots, connecting everything that was already available from the Industry 4.0 and from the data space community level. In terms of our mission, is actually to prepare what is coming next. The data space project, the preparatory action, is basically the first part of a number of phases that will take place over the next 2-3 years that will support the deployment of data spaces. And the deployment of data spaces is actually critical if we want to support this vision of Industry 4.0, moving from increased automation into a more sustainable green industry with autonomous capabilities that is actually human-centered. There is already a pathway that has been set up by the manufacturing industry that should be fulfilled in the next 3 to 4 years, and actually data spaces are a crucial element. Without this ability of sharing high-quality data that can actually be shared and transferred across sector, across different companies, it is actually very difficult to reach the level of autonomy or intelligence that we all expect from our manufacturing sites. So in all this process of consolidation, validation, and transition towards these new digital business models, data spaces is basically the action that should help to consolidate a blueprint that fulfills the needs of the Industry 4.0. We will not start from a green field, since we will have to build upon the blueprint that the DSSC will actually provide for the whole set of verticals. If you want to connect with the initiative, basically you can do it in 2 forms. The project itself, Data Space 4.0, will last basically till the end of 2023. If you want to connect with the community, the Data Space 4.0 Alliance is something that will prevail and will exist beyond the data space itself. Here you can see what are the main points of information, and we really invite you to link and to connect with any of the initiatives that are available from the CSA in the form that fits you best. Which are the companies that are actually, or the members that are putting forward this proposal? and this project. This initiative actually is very much rooted in the Industry 4.0 initiatives. If you look at the partnership, it is something that is actually very much connected with the different countries in Europe, building a strong Industry 4.0 that is fully relying on data sharing and data spaces as the instrument to implement this type of projects. We can see that the countries France, Spain, Italy, Germany, Netherlands, and Sweden are probably the first ones that are actually moving forward in setting up this harmonized and unified vision in terms of how the different initiatives on data spaces for industry should look like at the national level, but with a pan-European and interoperable approach in this respect. And as I was mentioning before, when we started this initiative, we were actually not alone. There were important communities, important associations that are actually connected with the machine tool industry, with the digital twin standardization, with the automation and engineering activities, with the knowledge and innovation communities in Europe that are actually equally interested and pushing towards the development of these activities. This is just the current list of entities that are collaborating in the different activities of the CSA, and this list is just the beginning. So any association, any initiative that is interested in contributing actively to the development of this type of blueprints and preparation for the development and deployment of data spaces, contact us. We are open, and we will invite everyone to take part into the dialogue. Because at the end of the day, our mission is to provide access to a set of tools, reference models, practices that will tackle the main problems that industry has in terms of data sharing. And those are related to the cost, to the security, to the trust, and to the sovereignty in terms of the usage of that data. I think Boris was mentioning some of these more practical constraints in terms of deploying data spaces. The CSA is actually trying to provide some guideline in terms of how the manufacturing sector would actually implement those. But we are not just providing guidelines. We really want to get to the point where we can provide the minimal elements that allow this minimum viable framework for implementation of data spaces 4.0. We don't expect that any new initiative has to start from scratch. What we are actually building together as a consortium is this possibility that any country, any company, any stakeholder that is willing to start the operation of these data spaces can start from a minimum viable framework that will accelerate and the adoption, the scale up, and the growth of a full European community. Manufacturing per se is quite a large economic activity sector. We have a lot of stakeholders, we have a lot of subsectors. Each one of them, they have their own dynamics and their own business rules. And we had to focus the activity of the data spaces to fulfill two main problems. So basically, the blueprints and the activities that we are performing in the manufacturing CSA are focused on delivering and facilitating two types of the implementation of two types of data value networks. On one side, Asset 4.0 management and predictive maintenance. On the other one, agile supply chains. And this is basically because the industry itself has identified over the last couple of years as the two more important areas of business developments where data sharing can really make a difference, where data sharing can really make the business case in terms of data quality sharing and the development of AI applications. Very recently, because of the new strategies from the manufacturing sector in terms of developing these net zero operations, the circular manufacturing has taken equal importance. So in the project, what we are also trying to make the link between the implementation of our digital product passports and how manufacturing data spaces can actually be an enabler and a facilitator to the actual realization of these digital product passports. We are addressing a number of sectors, and when we look at the different typologies of data value networks that we will have to support in the sector, we make a differentiation between those data value networks that are highly hierarchical, where we have a clear and a very distinct owner of the data value network, and we can think of very hierarchical supply chain networks in the automotive or in the aeronautics sectors, whereas we have some other environments where the operation is not so hierarchical. And then it is more a peer-to-peer or a flat type of collaborations. In terms of objectives of what we are aiming at, basically we are looking at ways in which we can really address the new challenges that the Data Governance Act and the Data Act put in terms of data sharing for the manufacturing industry. We want to also address a very important aspect of manufacturing. 95% of the manufacturing sector is dominated by SMEs. So for us, connecting SMEs with the Digital Innovation Hub Support Center network is of key importance. And as well, we have to accelerate how actually the operational, the maintenance cost of all this secure sharing of fair data can be implemented. That we need to provide some guidelines. In terms of outcomes, the project will make available to the community. It is already providing this initial form of community where we have to define the governance model and a number of directories and points of information where people can find blueprints, toolkits, and different elements that are indispensable to build the techno, business, and legal dimensions of data spaces. And all this will be structured in a multi-step roadmap that will complement the roadmap for autonomous factories already provided by the manufacturing industry. Why is it important to join an initiative like Data Space 4.0? Basically because we can really provide connection with the stakeholders that nationally and internationally are actually shaping the development of these blueprints and particular data value chains. Most of the companies would be interested either in participating or in providing services for customers that they are able to connect and participate in this type of value networks. Data Space 4.0 is actually the community that brings the knowledge, brings the expertise, brings the best practices that then they can be taken by the participants and then transferred to the national, regional, and very local activities in each country. It's a place where ideas, strategies, use cases will be shared, will be transferred from the national level at European level, and unlock, hopefully, these new business models that are actually expected from data sharing. In order to engage and to realize all these outcomes, the community has basically set up a number of activities. Activities that are directed in terms of defining these blueprints for Data Space 4.0, providing specific customizations for certification programs that go beyond the existing ones, providing, and we will start in January this year to deliver our first sectorial requirement on data space design, providing data value chain scenarios, and facilitating a number of physical events where we will unbox the first set of results around May this year, trying to connect with big events and fairs in the manufacturing sector across Europe, and then after the summer, really having specific events that will help to adopt whatever blueprint and solutions that we are putting on the table. And what you should expect as well is not just activities at European level, but also you will see that your national partners, your international experts are actually engaged and promoting these type of activities as well. In terms of specific points of information, as part of our community, we are starting to create our directories. There is already a directory in providing access to reference documentation. During January, we will start having our first directory that provides access to building blocks and technical assets that can be used to build not only the data space, but as well digital twin technology that can take advantage of the existence of this minimum viable framework for data space 4.0. In terms of governance, during 2023, we will continue with the maturing of the Data Space 4.0 Alliance that should bring together all these different stakeholders. And in terms of making the life easier for SMEs, we are connecting our community with a partner program that is intended to connect with the European network of digital innovation hubs and the very recent launch of the network of testing and experimentation facilities in artificial intelligence. What we want to make sure is that all these networks can actually support the adoption of the blueprints, the adoptions of the innovations and the reference and guidelines that are provided by the CSA. How to get engaged? Basically via the community, and you decide the best way in which you would like to participate with Data Space 4.0. The Data Space 4.0 community is actually open, so as a member you can take activities, you can design with us, you can participate as a full partner of the initiative. If you want basically to collaborate with us, to join our activities, we are also open to that, and it is that easy. If you simply want to see, to be aware what is going on, I think in a similar way as you have seen with the GREAT initiative, you simply have to take 1 minute, and then you can basically connect with us, and you will receive all the information about the project. If you really want to become active, if you really want to be part of all these activities and to shape how this Data Spaces 4.0 should look like, how your initiative will be influenced by the decisions made by other countries or at European level, then simply join the community and start working with us today. Thank you very much, and hopefully at the end of 2023 we can say thank you in all the languages of the European Union, and we should really start realizing this European single market for Industry 4.0. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oscar. So great having you here, and it's so necessary and important that we collaborate, as this is also the core to the DSSC. Thank you very much. So maybe just to pick one question for you, as it pops up here, could you maybe explain the relationship to manufacturing X? That is maybe interesting for the participants. Thanks.
If I understood correctly, Francisca, you are mentioning manufacturing X, no? Is
correct? Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess manufacturing X, that was something, if I'm not mistaken, a couple of weeks ago, there was a big presentation about this flagship initiative in Germany. I think it is very relevant and something that is very much aligned with the activities of the CSA, because it's taking the idea of manufacturing data space with a vision across sectors. So actually it's taking a similar approach and a similar vision as we are taking in Data Space 4.0. Data Space 4.0, what actually brings is an international dimension to the manufacturing X initiative. So actually this cross-sectorial approach, we can add a pan-European dimension to that flagship initiative, making sure that it's not just a German initiative that is really bringing the ecosystem forward, but actually this very same initiative can actually be aligned and harmonized with other initiatives that are taken by other sectors of manufacturing across Europe. So I would say that this opens the possibility of a European dimension and a European harmonization of manufacturing X.
Thank you so much. Great. Thank you so much for your presentation. And as we have another presentation on the EDIP, I would now like to ask Teemu on stage. And if you are ready, to please share your screen. And we can almost see it. Yeah, now we can see it. Perfect. Thanks.
All right.
Over to you.
Thank you, Franziska, and hi, everybody. My name is Teemu Ropponen from the Data Space Support Center, involved in lots of the stakeholder activities and also actually in the skills data space, which perhaps another time we will talk about. I realize we're running a bit out of time or a bit late on time, so I will try to capture the essential in a few minutes so that we have time for the great Q&A that has been going on all the time. So just very briefly presenting the European Data Innovation Board, and then specifically something on the collaboration between the Data Spaces Support Center and this instrument, or EDIB, as it's called. So really in summary, as you well know by now, the Data Space Support Center is facilitating these common European data spaces, and one element of the work that the Data Space Support Center does is to support what's called the European Data Innovation Board, in particular with
Timo, I think I at least cannot hear you anymore. I don't know how about the others. Boris, can you hear Timo or not?
No, we cannot.
Oh, he's gone somehow.
Okay, so while he is reconnecting, maybe somebody from the GaiaX team can reach out to him. We can maybe already dedicate some time to the Q&As because there are some very very good questions. So, for example, but I think now he's reconnecting. Timo?
Oh, okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Can you
Yes.
see me again? All
Yes.
right. My apologies for this glitch. So Data Spaces Support Center is a kind of an operational arm of the European Data Innovation Board, meaning we work hand in hand in some way. And let me explain just a little bit what that might mean. First of all, the European Data Innovation Board is defined in the Data Governance Act, Chapter 6. And some of you may have seen the video. If not, I highly recommend it. I believe with the material we can is sent this link made by Yogi, who was to be presenting earlier, did not quite make it. The Data Governance Act, as you may know, is entered into force, but it has a transition period, so it's applicable as of September this year. And that's when this new instrument or new governance body, Data Innovation Board, is in place. Right now, it does not exist. It has a legal basis, a legal grounding in the DGA. It does not exist. The EDIB will be a formal commission expert group, meaning that it has its own standard typical ways of working that are in fact a bit formal, and we try to find some new ways to be to get collaboration between the EDIB and the data space support as agile or smooth as possible to get the maximum impact. Who's in the EDIB? So there are basically the member states of the EU, their competent authorities, in particular for the data intermediation services and data altruism organizations. And there are other named representatives, for example, Data Protection Board, Data Protection Supervisor, and so on. But then there are also some let's say, other external representatives of relevant bodies in extending this this kind of formally defined group of actors. So in fact, there's and now I need to apologize. I see a small glitch here in the visualization. Three kinds of subgroups, three kinds of actors: the competent authorities, let's say, technical standardization, portability, and interoperability related group, and then a wider stakeholder involvement, which is consisting of various types of stakeholders: industry, academia, civil society, standardization, and so on. And now, what does this EDIB as a whole do? So there is a nice breakdown of the tasks, and I'm not going to read through all of them. But in general, it's about advising and assisting the Commission in practices, in guidelines, in taking input from standardization organization. It helps to facilitate cooperation between the member states and their competent authorities, and then, in fact, then propose guidelines for the common Europe spaces. And that, of course, is out of these the one that we are most interested about. And right now, again, this EDIB does not exist, and in fact, many of the member states have not named their competent authorities, that is the representatives in this EDIB in the first place. And I believe in February is meeting for the first time this bunch. So it is gradually coming together, this group that is forming EDIB by September. So right now we are in a kind of a formation phase, and the role of the DSSC has been to kind of define that how would we operate in collaboration with this organization, and based on various stakeholder activities, workshops with at various events, informal discussions, and a survey in which some of you may have answered, we are kind of organizing some of those key findings and discussing then with our counterparts at the Commission on how to get a kind of a working plan together. So when this body forms in September, there is already something to start from, to not start from scratch. And in practice, based on the feedback thus far, we are right now writing a paper. You will hear more about that, first of all, for some feedback, and then also hear it more widely promoted at the Data Spaces Symposium at The Hague in March of this year. By the way, if you have not heard of that event, you should definitely mark that into your calendar. And then further ongoing promotion of this paper, the suggestions for how DSSC and EDIB collaborate, as well as then more broadly a promotion of EDIB happening from April onwards, including at the MyData 2023 conference in Helsinki at the end of May. And just to give some of the findings right now, I think based on the surveys, there has been some, let's say, concern or request that this new body does not become too slow, but rather is able to provide impact, is able to provide guidance rather fast. So one of the things we think can be useful is to see if something like what we call the heartbeat, this regular half-year cycle, might be adopted within the EDIB. And also this kind of asset-based approach, for example, relating to the glossary, the blueprint, the conceptual model, and so on, can be something that is ready to be handed over by the time the EDIB starts. As a whole, the DSSC, including you, 300 people here, is a great network as a whole, and the EDIB can rely on that network for various parts of its activities and its expertise. It does not need to create another one. One key thing the Commission has asked is to make sure that we, the data space community, if I can say it that way, kind of suggest profiles or suggest the kind of expertise that the EDIB needs. So in addition to those formal groups that are named, the country representatives make sure that there is the right kind of expertise in these groups. And then finally, of course, the DSSC will do active promotion on behalf of the Data Innovation Board already now to some extent at these events, but also then after its creation and ramp up. And I realized this was a very, very quick run through, so I'm conscious of the time, so very happy to get any further interactions then by email. That's it in essence, and over to you, Franziska.
Thank you so much, Timo, and thank you also for keeping an eye on the time. And as you just said, in case people wish to receive more information about the EDIB, they can contact you. Maybe, Timo, you can write your email address into the chat so that we can make sure that everyone interested can reach out to you. So as
Franziska,
yeah,
Franziska, I think I can only write to the host and panelists. So if somebody will be so kind and write demo@mydata.org to the chat, just for others to see, and please do get in touch if this is of interest to you.
Great. Okay, so then it's on me to thank you all very much for participating this webinar. We unfortunately do not have too much time for Q&A, but I think Boris, Bert, and also Oscar and Nevena answered most of them in the chat via the chat function. On one event, I would like to make you aware that we will have our big data spaces symposium end of March. So please save the date already from the 21st until the 23rd of March, as that is also the time where the DSSC annual conference will take place. We will make sure to reach out to you, answering all the questions that we have stored with us. And thank you very much for participating today, and looking forward to seeing you latest at our next webinar end of February. Thank you very much and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.